One bullet, one witness, a dog that would spend 3 years hunting the killer.
The cattle baron thought he got away with murder, but he forgot about the dog who saw everything.
The Double C Ranch sprawled across 10,000 acres in Montana. Clayton owned it all with an iron fist ruling. He was the most powerful cattle baron in the territory. Clayton's wealth came from taking what he wanted by force. Small ranchers who refused to sell found their cattle stolen. Water rights were blocked through intimidation and threats always. Anyone who stood against Clayton faced ruin or worse fates. Tom worked as a ranch hand on the Double C. He was honest, hard-working, and well-liked by everyone who knew him. Tom had an Australian shepherd named Justice by his side. Justice was a striking dog with blue merle coat coloring. One eye was blue, the other brown, creating an unforgettable face. Justice was intelligent, loyal, and protective of Tom, always. The dog followed Tom everywhere during ranch work daily. Justice helped herd cattle with natural skill and precision shown. One afternoon, Clayton called Tom to his ranch office privately. Tom entered with Justice following close behind him, as usual. "Sit," Clayton ordered, while pouring whiskey into a crystal glass. Tom sat in the chair across from Clayton's desk. Justice sat beside Tom's leg, watching Clayton with both eyes. "I have a job for you," Clayton said coldly. "There's a homesteader on my land refusing to leave peacefully." Tom frowned at those words spoken with cruel intent clearly. "Your land?" Tom asked carefully. "He filed a legal claim, sir." Clayton's face hardened into an angry mask of rage instantly. "Everything here is my land," he stated flatly, without emotion. "I want you to burn his cabin tonight." Tom stood up immediately, with shock showing on his honest face. "I won't do that," Tom said firmly and clearly. "That's arson." Clayton's cold eyes narrowed dangerously at the refusal given to him.
"You work for me," Clayton reminded Tom with menace obvious. "You do what I say or you're finished here." Tom shook his head, standing his ground with quiet courage. "Then I'm finished," Tom replied. "I won't hurt innocent people." Clayton stood up slowly from his leather chair behind desk. "You'll regret this decision," he said with deadly calm voice. Tom turned to leave, with Justice following beside him loyally. "Tom!" Clayton called out as they reached the office door. Tom turned back to face his former employer one last time. Justice's hackles rose suddenly, sensing danger from Clayton immediately and instinctively. The dog growled low in his throat as warning to Tom. Clayton's hand moved to his vest pocket smoothly and quickly. Tom saw the gun appear, but couldn't react fast enough. The shot echoed across the ranch like thunder, cracking suddenly. Tom fell backward, clutching his chest with shock in eyes.
Justice barked frantically and lunged toward Clayton in a protective response. But Clayton had already moved to the door quickly and decisively. He shouted for his ranch hands outside the office loudly. "Help! Tom's been shot!" Clayton yelled with false panic in voice. Justice stood over Tom's body, growling at Clayton with both eyes. Tom's hand reached weakly toward Justice one last time, desperately. "Justice," Tom whispered, with blood on his lips showing. "Run!" Justice whined, pressing his nose against Tom's face gently and sadly. But Tom's hand fell limp to the floor, motionless now. His eyes stared at nothing, seeing no more, forever gone. Justice howled with grief that echoed across the entire ranch. Ranch hands burst into the office, finding the terrible scene. Clayton pointed at Justice with his gun still in hand. "The dog went crazy," Clayton lied smoothly and convincingly. "He attacked Tom, and I had to shoot." The ranch hands looked confused at Clayton's obvious lie told. They knew Justice was gentle and loyal to Tom always. But Clayton was the boss, and his word was law. "Get that dog out of here,"
Clayton ordered coldly. "Before I shoot it, too." A ranch hand named Pete grabbed Justice's collar, pulling him away. Justice fought and snarled, trying to reach Clayton desperately now. But Pete dragged Justice outside, away from Tom's body lying. Justice was locked in a barn stall for the night. The dog paced frantically, barking and howling with grief and rage. He had watched Clayton murder Tom in cold blood, deliberately. Justice would never forget Clayton's face or scent ever again. That night, Sarah arrived at the ranch after receiving news. She was Tom's younger sister and only living family remaining. Sarah found Tom's body being loaded onto a wagon, covered. She collapsed, crying beside her brother's covered form with grief.
Pete approached Sarah gently while she grieved for her brother. "Ma'am," Pete said quietly with sympathy in his weathered face, "your brother's dog is in the barn going crazy." Sarah looked up with tears streaming down her pale face. "Justice?" she asked while wiping her eyes with trembling hands. Pete nodded toward the barn where howling could be heard. "Mr. Clayton says the dog attacked Tom," Pete explained carefully. "Says he's dangerous now and should be shot tomorrow." Sarah's eyes widened with shock at those terrible words spoken. "That's a lie," she said, standing up with sudden strength. "Justice would never hurt Tom, ever, in any circumstance." Pete looked around nervously before leaning closer to Sarah's ear. "I know," he whispered quietly. "We all know the truth here." Sarah understood immediately what Pete meant by those careful words. Clayton had killed Tom and blamed Justice for the murder. Sarah went to the barn immediately, finding Justice in the stall. The dog was frantic, pacing, whining, desperate with grief and rage. "Justice," Sarah called gently through the stall door, opening it. Justice rushed to Sarah, pressing against her legs, desperately seeking comfort. Sarah knelt down, hugging the grieving dog tightly to her body. "I know," she whispered to Justice with her own tears falling. "I know what happened to Tom, my dear brother." Justice whined and licked Sarah's face, gently acknowledging her grief shared. "Clayton killed him, didn't he?" Sarah asked the dog quietly. Justice's ears went back at Clayton's name mentioned, and he growled. Sarah stood up with determination, replacing grief on her young face. "We're leaving tonight," she told Justice with firm resolve now. "Before Clayton kills you too, like he plans to do." Sarah saddled Tom's horse and helped Justice onto it with her. They rode away from the Double C Ranch into darkness. Behind them, Tom's body lay cold in the wagon bed. Ahead, Clayton believed he had gotten away with murder completely. But Clayton had made one fatal mistake in his cruel plan. He had left one witness alive who would never forget. Justice had seen everything that happened in that office clearly. The dog knew Clayton's face, his scent, his voice, his everything. And Justice would spend however long it took hunting Clayton down. For Tom, for justice itself. The cattle baron's reckoning was coming inevitably and surely. Justice would make certain of that fact, no matter what. Sarah took Justice to her small homestead 20 miles from the ranch. She lived alone after her parents had died years ago. Sarah buried Tom on a hillside overlooking her land properly. Justice lay beside the grave for 3 days, refusing to leave. Sarah brought food and water, but Justice barely touched it. On the 4th day, Justice finally stood and walked away slowly. But something had changed in the dog's eyes permanently now. The gentle herding dog was gone from his blue and brown eyes. What remained was cold determination and focused rage burning inside. Justice began leaving the homestead every morning at dawn regularly. He would disappear for hours, returning only at nightfall, exhausted. Sarah didn't know where Justice went during those long absences, but she noticed Justice always returned from the direction of town. One evening, Sarah followed Justice at a distance, carefully and quietly.
Justice traveled to the town saloon where Clayton often drank. The dog positioned himself across the street, in shadows, watching. Clayton emerged from the saloon, drunk and laughing with other men. Justice's body tensed and a low growl rumbled deep inside. But the dog didn't attack or reveal himself to anyone there. He simply watched Clayton climb onto his horse and ride away. Then Justice followed at a distance, tracking Clayton's route home. Sarah understood immediately what Justice was doing with his time. The dog was studying Clayton's patterns and movements and routines, learning when Clayton was vulnerable and where he went daily. Justice was planning something patient and calculated for later execution. This wasn't mindless animal revenge driven by rage and emotion. This was intelligent, purposeful hunting by a smart dog with memory. Sarah returned home before Justice and waited for him there.
When Justice returned that night, Sarah confronted him, gently but firmly. "You can't kill Clayton," she said to the dog seriously. Justice looked at Sarah with his mismatched eyes, showing understanding clearly. "He's too powerful," Sarah continued, while kneeling before Justice's face. "His ranch hands will kill you if you attack him." Justice whined softly, but his eyes remained hard and determined still. Sarah sighed, knowing she couldn't stop Justice from his mission. "Then be smart about it," she whispered to the loyal dog. "Wait for the right moment when you can survive it." Justice pressed his head against Sarah's hand, acknowledging her words spoken, but Sarah knew Justice would do what he intended regardless. For the next 6 months, Justice continued his surveillance of Clayton. The dog learned every detail of Clayton's daily routine and schedule. Morning rides to inspect cattle at dawn every single day. Afternoon visits to the bank in town for business meetings. Evening drinks at the saloon with his foreman and men. Justice memorized all of it with perfect recall and intelligence shown. Clayton remained unaware he was being watched and studied constantly. The cattle baron had forgotten about Tom's dog completely by now. He believed Justice had run away or died somewhere alone. Clayton continued his ruthless business practices without conscience or care shown. He drove another small rancher off land through intimidation and violence. He diverted water from homesteaders upstream, leaving them dry and desperate. Clayton's power and wealth grew while others suffered under his control. But Justice watched it all happening from the shadows, patiently waiting. 1 year after Tom's murder, something changed in the territory. A U.S. Marshal arrived investigating complaints about Clayton's illegal activities reported. The Marshal's name was Hawkins, an experienced lawman with a reputation for fairness. He interviewed homesteaders and small ranchers who had suffered under Clayton. Everyone told stories of intimidation, theft, and violence committed regularly, but no one would testify against Clayton in court publicly. They were too afraid of retaliation from his ranch hands. Marshal Hawkins visited Sarah at her homestead one afternoon looking. "Your brother Tom worked for Clayton," Hawkins said while sitting across from Sarah. Sarah nodded, carefully, unsure if she could trust this lawman. "Tom was murdered," Sarah stated flatly, looking directly at Hawkins' eyes. "Clayton shot him in his office a year ago today." Hawkins leaned forward with interest, showing clearly on his weathered face. "Can you prove that serious accusation?" he asked, directly and honestly. Sarah shook her head with frustration showing on her young face.
I wasn't there, Sarah admitted with sadness in her quiet voice. But Tom's dog, Justice, witnessed everything that happened in that room. Hawkins looked skeptical at those words about a dog witness. A dog can't testify in court, he said gently to Sarah. Justice, who had been lying in the corner quietly, suddenly stood up. The dog walked to Marshal Hawkins and stared at him intently. Hawkins looked into Justice's mismatched eyes and saw something there. Intelligence, understanding, and a burning need for justice to be served properly. This dog knows something, Hawkins said slowly, with realization dawning clearly. Sarah nodded while stroking Justice's blue merle coat gently and carefully. He's been watching Clayton for a year now, she explained quietly. Learning his patterns and routines, waiting for something, I think. Hawkins considered this information carefully before speaking again to them.
I need evidence against Clayton, Hawkins said firmly, with determination showing. Physical evidence that proves he's committed crimes that can stick. Sarah thought carefully before responding to the marshal's statement made. Clayton keeps records of everything in his ranch office, she said. Tom told me once Clayton writes down every illegal deal. Hawkins' eyes lit up at that valuable information given to him. If I could get into that office, he began thoughtfully. But Sarah interrupted him with sudden inspiration striking her mind clearly. Justice can get in, she said, looking at her brother's dog. Justice's ears perked up, hearing his name spoken by Sarah now. He knows the ranch layout perfectly, Sarah continued with growing excitement. He's been watching it for a year, studying every detail carefully. Hawkins looked at Justice with new interest and possibility forming. Can you train him to retrieve something specific? He asked Sarah.
Sarah and Marshal Hawkins spent the next week training Justice for the mission. They used an old ledger book from Sarah's cabin as practice. Sarah taught Justice to recognize the book's size, weight, and smell. Fetch, Sarah commanded while pointing at the ledger book placed nearby. Justice picked up the book gently in his mouth and brought it. They repeated this hundreds of times until Justice never made mistakes. Hawkins was impressed by Justice's intelligence and focus shown consistently. I've never seen a dog learn this fast, he admitted. Sarah smiled while stroking Justice's head with pride and affection. He's motivated, she said simply. This is for Tom. Justice's eyes remained fixed on the ledger book with intense concentration. The dog understood this training had a purpose beyond simple games. On the 7th day, they were ready to attempt the mission. Hawkins scouted Clayton's ranch during the day carefully and quietly. He confirmed that Clayton kept his ledgers in the office.
The plan was simple, but dangerous for Justice to execute alone. Justice would enter the ranch at night when guards were minimal. He would go to the office, retrieve a ledger, and bring it. Marshal Hawkins and Sarah would wait at the ranch boundary ready. If anything went wrong, Hawkins would intervene with legal authority shown. That night, they rode to the Double C Ranch together, silently. Justice sat alert between them, on Sarah's horse, watching ahead intently. They stopped a quarter-mile from the ranch house, hiding. Remember, Sarah whispered to Justice while kneeling before him on ground. Get the book and come straight back to us here. Justice licked Sarah's face once, acknowledging her instructions given to him. Then the dog disappeared into the darkness, heading toward the ranch. Justice moved like a ghost through the shadows, silently and purposefully. He had done this journey 100 times over the past year. Every guard position was memorized in his intelligent mind perfectly.
Justice reached the ranch house without being detected by anyone there. A guard sat on the porch smoking and half asleep from boredom. Justice waited patiently in shadows until the guard's head nodded forward. Then Justice slipped past silently like smoke, moving through the air. The office window was slightly open, as it usually was. Justice had noticed this detail months ago during his surveillance work. He squeezed through the narrow opening, landing inside the dark office. Moonlight filtered through the window, providing enough light to see clearly. Justice's nose worked overtime, processing the scents in the room carefully. He smelled Clayton's cologne, cigar smoke, leather, and something else important. Paper. Old paper. The ledgers. Justice followed his nose to Clayton's desk in the corner there. The ledgers were stacked neatly on a shelf behind the desk. Justice stood on his hind legs, reaching for the top ledger book. His teeth closed gently on the leather binding without damaging it. Justice pulled the ledger down carefully and placed it on the floor. Then he heard something that made his blood run cold instantly. Footsteps. Someone was coming down the hallway toward the office door now. Justice grabbed the ledger and dove under the desk, hiding immediately. The office door opened and lamplight flooded the dark room suddenly. Clayton entered the office carrying a lamp in one hand, steadily. He was drunk from the saloon but still functional enough to walk. Clayton set the lamp on his desk, directly above Justice's hiding spot. Justice remained perfectly still under the desk, barely breathing at all. Clayton sat down in his chair and pulled out papers. His boots were inches from Justice's nose under the desk, close. Justice could smell Clayton's scent strongly now, up close and personal. The same scent from Tom's murder a year ago, exactly matching. Justice's entire body tensed with rage, contained barely by willpower and training. Every instinct screamed to attack Clayton right now while vulnerable and alone. But Justice remembered Sarah's words, clearly spoken earlier that evening to him. Get the book and come straight back. Justice controlled himself. Tom's justice required evidence, not just revenge killing Clayton tonight, here. Clayton worked for 20 minutes, writing in another ledger book while drunk. Justice waited motionless under the desk with the stolen ledger in his mouth. Finally, Clayton stood up with the lamp in his hand again. He walked to the door and left the office, closing it. Justice waited another 5 minutes, making sure Clayton was gone completely. Then he emerged from under the desk with the ledger book. Justice squeezed back through the window into the night outside air. The guard on the porch was now fully asleep and snoring. Justice ran across the yard toward the boundary fence ahead. Justice reached Sarah and Marshal Hawkins at the meeting point successfully and safely. Sarah grabbed Justice, hugging him with relief flooding through her completely. "Good boy," she whispered, while tears streamed down her grateful face. Marshal Hawkins took the ledger from Justice's mouth gently and carefully. He opened it under moonlight, reading the first page with growing amazement. "This is it," Hawkins said with satisfaction in his experienced voice. "Every illegal transaction Clayton's made for 5 years, documented here." The ledger contained bribes paid to officials, land stolen through fraud, water rights illegally diverted, cattle rustling, intimidation, arson, and more crimes. And on a page dated exactly 1 year ago today, payment to ranch hands for silence regarding Tom's death. Clayton had documented his own crime in writing for accounting records. Marshal Hawkins arrested Clayton the next morning with a dozen deputies. Clayton protested loudly, claiming the ledger was stolen illegally from him. "Doesn't matter how I got it," Hawkins said while putting irons on Clayton's wrists. "The evidence is real and your handwriting is clear throughout the pages." Clayton was taken to the territorial prison to await trial for his crimes. His ranch was seized by the territorial government pending investigation and forfeiture.
The homesteaders and ranchers he had terrorized finally felt safe from his cruelty. Sarah attended Clayton's trial 2 months later, with justice beside her throughout. The prosecution presented the ledger as evidence of Clayton's systematic criminal activities. Clayton's expensive lawyers tried to discredit the ledger's authenticity unsuccessfully every time. But handwriting experts confirmed it was Clayton's writing throughout the book. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning their verdict. Guilty on all charges, the foreman announced to the packed courtroom. Clayton's face went white with shock at the guilty verdict pronounced publicly. He looked around the courtroom desperately seeking sympathy from someone there. His eyes landed on Sarah, sitting in the front row watching. And beside Sarah sat Justice, with his mismatched blue and brown eyes. Clayton suddenly understood everything in that moment, clearly and completely now.
"The dog," Clayton whispered with realization dawning on his pale face. "That damn dog." Justice stared at Clayton with those intelligent eyes, showing no mercy at all. The dog had spent a year planning this moment of justice served, had watched, learned, waited, and acted when the moment was perfect finally. Clayton was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison for his crimes. His wealth was distributed to his victims as restitution for damages done. The Double C Ranch was broken up and sold to homesteaders. Sarah used her portion to expand her homestead into a proper ranch. Justice lived with Sarah for the rest of his days, peacefully. The dog never forgot Tom, but the rage had finally left him. Justice had done what he set out to do, completely and thoroughly. He had brought justice for Tom's murder through intelligence and patience shown. The story of justice spread throughout the Montana Territory, quickly and widely. A dog who had hunted a killer for a year, waiting patiently.
Who had learned to retrieve evidence that convicted a murderer legally and properly, who had proven that loyalty extended beyond death into justice itself. Sarah would sit with Justice on Tom's grave sometimes, in quiet moments. "He's proud of you," she would tell Justice while stroking his fur. "You got justice for him the right way." Justice would lay his head on Sarah's lap contentedly, at peace. The rage that had driven him for a year was finally satisfied. Clayton's empire had fallen. His crimes had been punished. Tom's death had been avenged through the law properly. And Justice, the Australian shepherd with mismatched eyes, had made it happen. Not through violence or revenge killing as expected from animals, but through intelligence, patience, and determination that proved remarkable and unprecedented. Marshal Hawkins visited Sarah's ranch occasionally to check on them both. "That dog should be famous," Hawkins said one afternoon while watching Justice. "What he did was extraordinary, beyond any animal I've seen."
Sarah smiled while watching Justice play with some sheep nearby, herding them. "He's just Justice," she said simply, "doing what he was named for." Years later, when Justice passed peacefully in his sleep one night, Sarah buried him beside Tom's grave on the hillside overlooking her land. She placed a stone marker between the two graves with words, "Tom and Justice, together in life and death, both served justice." And in the Montana Territory, the story of Justice the dog lived on, told around campfires and in saloons by those who witnessed it, about a dog who never forgot his murdered friend and owner always, who spent a year studying his enemy with remarkable intelligence shown, who retrieved the evidence that brought down a cattle baron's empire, who proved that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places, from a dog with one blue eye and one brown eye staring, from loyalty that extends beyond death into vengeance served cold, from intelligence that rivals human cunning and patience displayed perfectly. Justice had lived up to his name in every possible way.